Daniel thought his mother vanished because she didn't want him, but the truth was something far darker. When she finally spoke those 7 words, every belief he held about his childhood collapsed. And what happened next didn't just shock the audience. It left Dr. Phil completely speechless. The moment Daniel sat down across from Lydia, he felt that old heaviness return, the same weight he carried since he was 5 years old. He kept his eyes low at first, almost like he was afraid that if he looked at her too long, old wounds would open all over again. Lydia shifted nervously in her chair, her fingers tightly gripping a small brown envelope as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. The studio lights were warm, but the air between them felt cold, stiff, and full of years of silence. Dr. Phil began gently, trying to ease them into the conversation. But before he could even finish his first question, Lydia leaned forward, her voice trembling as she said, "I was wrong to leave you." The entire room went still. It was the kind of moment where even people watching through a screen would instinctively lean closer, waiting for what came next. Daniel blinked, as if trying to process whether he actually heard her correctly or if his mind was playing tricks on him. For 22 years, he'd told himself she didn't care, that she chose freedom over being a mother. Hearing her admit fault felt like the ground shifting beneath him. But instead of relief, anger shot through him. His hands curled into fists. He whispered, "You don't get to say that now." But his voice cracked halfway through. Viewers could feel it, the confusion of a boy inside a grown man's body, trying to understand why the person meant to protect him decided to disappear. Lydia swallowed hard, glancing down at the envelope again, as though everything she needed to explain was trapped inside it. Dr. Phil noticed it too and gently asked what was in the envelope. Lydia hesitated. Her hands shook so intensely that the paper made a faint rustling sound that echoed louder than it should have. She finally said, almost in a whisper, "It's the real reason I left." That one sentence created a ripple in the studio. The audience leaned closer. Daniel stiffened as if bracing for a blow. He refused to look at the envelope. "I'm not opening that here," he said sharply, pulling back in his chair. To him, that envelope felt like a Pandora's box, something that could rewrite his entire past in an instant. Lydia's face fell, and she whispered, "You don't know the full truth." Those words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break open. A question formed in the minds of everyone watching, a question Daniel himself was too scared to ask. What truth could possibly justify a mother walking away from her only child? And what if the story he lived his whole life was only half the truth? Dr. Phil took a steady breath, sensing the emotional depth of the moment. The stage wasn't just a stage anymore. It became a place where decades of pain, misunderstandings, and silent wounds were finally being pulled into the light. Yet the envelope remained shut, and Lydia's eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, silently begging him to keep listening. And even though the conversation seemed to pause for a moment, the tension only grew stronger, like a drumbeat slowly getting louder. Because behind that envelope, behind Lydia's trembling voice, behind those 7 words, was something that would shift this entire reunion from painful to life-altering. Would Daniel be able to hear what came next? Or would the truth break him even more? 3 weeks before the studio lights, the cameras, and that trembling confession, Daniel was living a quiet, predictable life. He worked long shifts at a small hardware store, kept to himself, and tried not to think too much about the past. He had built entire walls around those memories, thick walls made of silence and routine. But all it took was a single voicemail to crack them wide open. He came home that night exhausted, tossing his keys onto the counter like any other evening. His phone buzzed with a notification. 1 missed call. 1 voicemail. The number was blocked. He almost ignored it. Blocked numbers usually meant spam or someone trying to sell him something he didn't need. But something in his chest tugged, a strange heaviness. It made him press play. And then he heard her voice. "Daniel, it's your mother. I need to talk to you. Please." The sound of Lydia's voice, older, weaker, almost trembling, sent a shock through his entire body. It had been 22 years since he last heard it. For a moment, he thought it was some kind of sick joke. But the more he listened, the more he recognized the softness in her tone, a softness that once tucked him into bed at night. He replayed the message at least 5 times. Each time it felt more surreal. Why now? Why after so many years of silence? And what could possibly be so urgent that she had to hide behind a block number? His heart pounded as he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall as if the answers might appear there. But the voicemail wasn't the only thing waiting for him. Earlier that day, he found a plain envelope in his mailbox. No return address. No name. Inside was an old photograph, a picture of him at 5 years old, holding a toy truck he barely remembered. It would have been just a harmless memory, except someone had written a date on the back. A date he had never seen before. A date that meant nothing to him, yet felt like it should. That combination, the photo and the voicemail, hit him harder than he expected. It felt like someone had reached into the past, into a part of his life he'd spent years trying to forget, and dragged it back into the light. The timing was too strange to ignore, too deliberate. He tried calling the number back, but it was impossible. Blocked. He tried to delete the voicemail, thinking maybe he could erase its impact, but his finger froze over the screen. He couldn't do it, because as much as he hated to admit it, hearing her voice awakened something inside him. A familiar pain. A familiar longing. And an anger he had never fully dealt with. He sat awake for hours that night, replaying memories he'd buried. The day she left. The confusion of being handed over to strangers. The cold foster homes where hugs were rare and trust was fragile. The stories he told himself to survive. She didn't love me. She didn't want me. She chose to leave. But now the voicemail suggested something different. Something he didn't know how to process. The next morning, another message arrived. This time she said, "If you hear my whole story, you might hate me more." Her voice cracked on the last word. That line haunted him. Hate her more? He didn't think that was possible. What could she possibly say that would make things worse than abandonment? What truth could be deeper than the wound she already left? Yet the fear in her voice, the urgency, made him hesitate. It made him question the narrative he lived with for so long. And that was the most unsettling part. Not the voicemail itself, but the fact that it made him doubt the one thing he always believed was solid. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one question refused to leave his mind. Would I answer a call from the person who hurt me the most? That question pulled him to the Dr. Phil show. That question brought him face to face with the woman who vanished from his life. And that question, whether he was ready or not, was about to be answered, because her truth was waiting on that stage. Back in the studio, the tension felt heavy enough to touch. The kind of heaviness you'd feel standing in a room just before a storm breaks. The audience barely breathed as Dr. Phil gently directed attention toward the small brown envelope Lydia kept pressed against her lap. It looked ordinary, something anyone could pick up for $1, but the way she held it, it was clear it carried the weight of years, maybe even decades. Daniel couldn't stop staring at it, even though he tried to pretend he wasn't. His knee bounced restlessly. His jaw stayed tight. That envelope felt like a threat, a secret, a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Because sometimes what we fear most isn't the lie we lived with, but the truth that might replace it. Dr. Phil leaned forward and spoke softly, the way he does when he senses emotional landmines. He asked, "Lydia, what's in the envelope?" She inhaled deeply, but the breath wavered on its way out. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it slightly off her lap, almost like it was burning her from the inside. "This," she said with a cracking voice, "is the real reason I left." That one sentence sent a ripple through the studio. Daniel's back straightened. The audience shifted in their seats. Even Dr. Phil paused, eyes narrowing just slightly, trying to gauge if she was ready to reveal what she'd buried all these years. But instead of opening it, Lydia held it closer to her chest. There was something protective in the way she did it, almost maternal, almost terrified. Daniel swallowed hard. "You don't have to do this," he muttered, though part of him needed her too, needed clarity more than he realized. Lydia shook her head. "Idol, I've carried this for so long it feels like a second heartbeat." She lowered her gaze, blinking rapidly to fight back tears. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I thought It was the only way to keep you safe. Daniel's eyebrows pulled together sharply. Safe? That wasn't a word he expected to hear. Not after years of imagining, she simply walked away without looking back. That single word cracked something inside him, something between anger and fear, between doubt and curiosity. The audience murmured softly, a collective confusion. Because how does abandoning a child ever equal protecting them? Dr. Phil asked her to elaborate. But before she could answer, Lydia's breath hitched. There was a man, she finally whispered. Someone from my past. Someone dangerous. Daniel's pulse quickened. A man? A threat? This was nothing like the stories he created to make sense of her disappearance. She wasn't describing regret or selfishness. She was describing fear. And fear, especially the kind that forces a mother to run, is loud without ever being spoken. Lydia wiped her eyes, trying to steady herself. I tried going to the authorities, but the reports went missing. Files disappeared. I didn't know who to trust. I was 22, alone, and her voice cracked fully. He found out about you. Daniel's breath got shallow. She continued. He said you were better off without me. That if I didn't walk away, he'd make sure neither of us would ever have a future. She clutched the envelope tighter. Everything that could have protected us vanished. Even a custody file. A few audience members gasped. It sounded almost unbelievable. Yet her trembling hands, her broken tone, made it feel devastatingly real. Daniel's anger didn't vanish, but it twisted, reshaped into something more complex. Confusion, suspicion, a fragile, unwanted hope that maybe he didn't grow up unloved. Maybe he grew up unprotected. Dr. Phil leaned in. He asked what was actually inside the envelope. Lydia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Instead, she slowly placed her hand on it, as if grounding herself. Finally, she whispered, "There's one more thing. One more truth you need to know." Her eyes met Daniel's for the first time without flinching. I wasn't the only one running. Daniel froze. The room fell silent. Lydia leaned even closer, her voice low enough that it felt like a secret shared across an entire studio. Someone else has been looking for you too. That sentence hit Daniel like a physical blow. His heart pounded. His mind raced. The photograph, the date, the voicemail, all the strange pieces began shifting into place, forming a shape he wasn't sure he wanted to see. What truth could be so heavy it keeps someone silent for decades? And who, after all these years, had been searching for him? The moment Lydia said someone else had been looking for him, the entire energy in the room shifted. Daniel felt the words sink into his chest like a stone dropping into deep water. Slow at first, then heavy, pulling everything down with it. His breath grew shallow as he tried to process what she meant. But before he could ask anything, Dr. Phil raised a hand gently, signaling that there was something the audience and Daniel needed to hear first. Daniel, Dr. Phil said softly, before the show, Lydia made a request. She asked us to run a DNA test. The world seemed to stop. Daniel blinked, confused. A DNA test? For what? Lydia closed her eyes, almost as if she couldn't bear to see his reaction. Her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles turning white. She didn't speak. She couldn't. And that silence said more than any explanation could. Dr. Phil continued carefully. We didn't want to blindside you. But the results, they came in this morning. A hush spread across the studio. Cameras zoomed in. The envelope on the table, the one Lydia had brought, suddenly looked small compared to the new envelope Dr. Phil now held. The official results. Daniel's heartbeat thudded in his ears. He felt a strange coldness move through him. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing one step forward could change everything. Lydia whispered, I couldn't tell you myself. I didn't trust my own voice to get the truth out. Dr. Phil laid the envelope flat between them. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he took a moment, letting the tension breathe, but not fade. Daniel, he said, the man you believed was your father, the man you were told about as a child, he isn't your biological father. It felt like the room exhaled all at once. Some gasped. Some covered their mouths. But Daniel didn't move. He just stared at Dr. Phil, his eyes blank, stunned, like someone had pulled the floor right out from under him. What? What do you mean? He finally whispered. Lydia broke then. Silent tears streamed down her face. I should have told you, she sobbed. I wanted to, but every time I tried, I thought I'd lose you even more. Daniel shook his head, overwhelmed. So who is he? Who? Why? Why was I never told anything? That's when Lydia's voice steadied. She wiped her cheeks, took a breath filled with decades of regret, and continued. Because your biological father, he didn't know you existed. And when I finally tried to find him, everything went wrong. Daniel stared at her, hurt, shocked, furious, and desperate to understand. Dr. Phil picked up the DNA report and gently slid it closer to Daniel. Before you open that, Dr. Phil said, there's something else you should know. Daniel looked up slowly. That date written on the back of the photo you received, the one you didn't recognize? Dr. Phil continued. It's not random. That's the date your biological father filed a missing person report. For you. Daniel's jaw dropped open. His throat tightened. That couldn't be real. It sounded impossible. Absurd. His entire life, he believed nobody looked for him except maybe social workers. Nobody fought for him. Nobody cared enough to search. But now, suddenly the story he thought he knew, this painful, lonely history, wasn't so solid after all. The truth was rewriting itself right in front of him. Lydia steadied her voice again. He didn't know I left the state. He didn't know I was hiding from someone dangerous. He thought you were taken from him. He searched for you for years, Daniel. Years. Daniel felt dizzy. His memories flickered. The loneliness, the birthday candles he blew out alone, the school plays with empty seats, all the moments he thought no one cared. Was he wrong all this time? He looked at the DNA envelope, still unopened, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted answers or if he feared them. Dr. Phil leaned in slightly. Daniel, you deserve the truth. All of it. A tremor ran through Daniel's hands as he reached for the envelope. But before he could tear it open, Lydia whispered the words that froze him in place. He's here today. Time stopped. Daniel's fingers slipped off the envelope. His heart hammered so loudly it felt like the entire studio could hear it. Dr. Phil sat back, giving him space, because this wasn't just a reveal. This was a lifetime collapsing and rebuilding in the same breath. Someone was here, not just watching, not just waiting. Someone who had been looking for him for 22 years. Daniel swallowed hard, barely breathing, barely present. A truth bigger than he ever imagined was no longer knocking. It was standing right outside the door. How do you face a truth that can change your entire identity? And was he ready for the man about to walk into his life? The studio felt colder now. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning, but the kind that sinks right into your bones, the kind that only arrives when a truth you never expected is about to step into your life. Daniel's fingers hovered above the DNA envelope, but he couldn't bring himself to touch it again. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. His eyes fixed on Lydia, searching for any hint that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at the studio door, the one Dr. Phil's producers used for major reveals. Her hands trembled, her lips pressed tightly together, as if she too was afraid of what came next. Dr. Phil spoke gently, breaking the suffocating silence. Daniel, I want you to prepare yourself. This next moment may be overwhelming, but you're safe here. You're supported. Supported. It didn't feel like it. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no idea whether stepping forward meant falling or flying. A soft click echoed through the room. The door handle turned. Daniel's entire body tensed. His pulse thudded loud in his ears. For a second, just a single heartbeat, he thought about running, standing up and walking off the stage. Because if he didn't see the man behind that door, then the truth couldn't hurt him. His story would stay familiar, even if painful. But the door opened anyway. A tall man stepped through, hesitating at the doorway, as though he didn't want to scare Daniel by entering too fast. His shoulders were slightly slumped, as if carrying years of exhaustion. His hands shook, not subtly, but visibly, and in one of them was the exact same photograph Daniel received in the mail. Same worn edges, Same date on the back. The audience didn't make a sound. Daniel stared at him, frozen in place. He didn't recognize the man's face, but something about his eyes, something about the softness in them, the pleading in them, felt familiar in a way he didn't know how to describe. A familiarity that bypassed memory and hit somewhere deeper, somewhere instinctive. The man stepped forward slowly. "Daniel," he whispered. His voice cracked. "I've been looking for you for most of my life." Daniel felt dizzy. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly the veins along his forearm stood out. Who are you?" Lydia's face crumpled. She whispered, "Your father." The man swallowed hard, tears gathering in his eyes. "My name is Michael. I'm her biological father." His voice shook, but he kept talking, desperate to say the words he'd held inside for decades. "I never knew Lydia was pregnant. I never knew you existed. And when I found out, you were already gone." Daniel's breath snagged in his throat. "Gone? From who? From where? Why?" Michael stepped closer, holding out the photograph. "This picture, I didn't take it. Someone sent it to me anonymously. I thought it was a clue. I thought it meant you were alive somewhere. So I filed a missing person report. I begged anyone who would listen. But every trail disappeared. Every record blocked. Every door slammed shut." He wiped his face, embarrassed by how hard the moment was hitting him. "I just wanted to find you. Just once. Just to see you. To tell you that you were never unwanted." That sentence broke something inside Daniel. Never unwanted. How many nights had he cried himself to sleep believing the exact opposite? How many birthdays did he blow out candles wishing for someone, anyone, to show up for him? How many versions of the story had he created to survive? All built on the belief that no one cared. And yet this man, this stranger, stood in front of him holding a photograph like it was sacred. Dr. Phil gently intervened again. "Michael, can you explain why you believe the records were sealed?" Michael nodded slowly. "I think someone didn't want to find him. Someone who had power over Lydia at the time. Someone who made both of us disappear from each other without us even knowing it." Lydia broke into quiet sobs. She covered her mouth with her trembling hands. "I tried to protect him," she whispered. "I didn't know you were trying to find him. I thought I was alone." Michael's expression softened. "You weren't. Not for a single day." Daniel swallowed hard, everything inside him a mess of emotions. Anger, disbelief, grief, confusion, and something else he didn't want to name. Hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was fragile. Hope could shatter him all over again. The room felt smaller now, like everything was closing in around him. But instead of pulling away, Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But the silence wasn't rejection. It was processing. It was him trying to rebuild his world in real time. Michael lowered himself slightly, trying to meet Daniel's gaze. "I don't expect anything from you," he whispered. "Not forgiveness. Not love. Not even a relationship. I just wanted you to know the truth. You were never abandoned. You were never forgotten." Daniel's breath trembled. For the first time since sitting on that stage, he felt something shift, something subtle but real. A door inside his heart cracked open just a little, letting in the faintest trace of light. Lydia looked at him through tears. "I can't undo what happened, but I'm here now, and I want to try, if you'll let me." Daniel looked between them. The mother who left him and the father he never knew existed. It was overwhelming. It was painful. It was terrifying. But it was also the closest he had ever been to finally understanding his own story. And for the first time in 22 years, he didn't feel entirely alone. Can a broken family rebuild when the truth finally comes out? That answer was no longer theoretical. It was standing on that stage, waiting for him to decide. Sometimes the truths we uncover don't erase the pain, but they give it context, and context can be the first step toward healing. If this story moved you, share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. You never know who might find comfort in your voice today.